All right, well, I'm just going to go ahead and start. So hello and welcome everyone. I'm Fred Bever. I am the Chief Communications Officer here at MDI Bio Lab, welcoming you to today's online version of the MDI Science Cafe. Really glad you could be here. We're joined in today's edition of the series by Cinda Scott, Ph.D., Dr. Cinda Scott, to talk about her work on equity in science and governance, marine governance in particular. So welcome to all of you. Hope your summer is winding up well. And Dr. Scott, you're a frequent world traveler. Where are you coming to us from today?
Hi, everyone. So right now I'm currently in Panama City in Panama. And I just flew today from Bocas del Toro to come to Panama because I'm actually on my way to go to Woods Hole tomorrow to give a couple of talks at Marine Biological Laboratory.
Our friends at MBL.
Your friends.
So truly a world traveler. We'll talk to you more in a minute. First, I'd like to mention that our Science Cafes this year are sponsored by Cross Insurance, whose support we greatly appreciate. And I encourage all of you to engage in our discussion with questions or comments. You can raise your hand virtually by clicking the participant button at the bottom of the screen and click the raise hand icon. You can write a question in the chat feature. Either way, I'll try to bring you in. Sharon Linscott, our operations and events coordinator, will help me get to you. It's been a little while since we've done a purely online cafe, so might be a little bit rusty. Now, about Cinda Scott. She's a graduate of Middlebury College. She received her Ph.D. in Marine Biology and Fisheries. And tell me if this is correct, Cinda, Evolutionary Molecular Genomics.
Genomics, yeah.
Genomics. So she got her doctorate in Marine Biology and Fisheries, Evolutionary Molecular Genomics at the University of Miami in 2009. She got her first exposure to laboratory work in biomolecular research here at MDI Bio Lab. Today, she directs a field studies education program in Bocas del Toro, Panama, where she just welcomed a new cohort of college students for the new semester. I hope they're settling in well. Cinda, her recent research is focused on issues of equity in science and conservation policy, how Indigenous communities respond to and work within the bounds of imposed tools for marine conservation, such as marine protected areas. Those are internationally recognized conservation zones. Is that correct, Cinda?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that you sort of work at the intersection of marine biology and social science?
Yes. So I've definitely taken a turn since 2009 of studying, my PhD started in the heritability of gene expression and understanding just what genes we inherit with respect to their expression. And I departed from that actually immediately after receiving my PhD. I wound up at New York City College of Technology, and I started teaching and working there, working with the provost to redesign a lot of the scientific curriculum there. But yes, I then missed my marine world and my marine life and decided to move to Panama in 2014 to take over as the director for the School for Field Studies Center for Tropical Island Biodiversity Studies. And ever since being there, I've sort of meshed my natural science understanding and training with what is absolutely necessary, which is social science as well. So I've been doing a mixture of both.
Well, before you launch into your presentation on some of the recent work you've done, you have a long history with MDI Bio Lab. You're an alum. And tell us a little bit about that. I mentioned that you're a Middlebury graduate, and you mentioned that you later were in New York and then Florida. But how did you get from Middlebury College, or even from where you grew up? How did you first get exposed to MDI Bio Lab, and what was that relationship?
So well, I'm from Boston originally, from Lexington, Mass. And I attended Middlebury. And during that time, I wasn't one of those kids who always thought that I could do everything. I didn't have the confidence back then to pursue as much as I wanted to research on campus. I always felt that was reserved for the really smart kids that really knew everything about biology. But then I went to this event. It was part of the Biomedical Science Careers Program, BCSP, out of Harvard. They invited students from all over to come to this event in Boston. And I met Barbara, the former director of MDI Bio Labs. And she said, you should apply for a research experience for undergraduates. And I didn't know who she was. I just kind of was like, okay, cool, lady, I'll do that. So I did. And I actually didn't do it my sophomore year. I did it at the end of my junior year. So I felt like I was a little bit late to the game. But she remembered me, and I was admitted to the program, the REU program. And, that, along with studying abroad, definitely changed my life forever and strengthened my confidence in being able to do science. I was able to mess up at MDIBL big time. And that is okay, because you had people shout out to Dr. Evans, who I just saw was on the call. You had people like Dr. Evans who were so kind and so pleasant and so nice, helping you along the way and making you make sure that, you knew that it was okay to mess up, but you could still keep going and keep doing it, right? So that was important, to be able to have a space where you felt comfortable to be able to do those errors.
Well, and that, of course, is central to the happy scientific enterprise that's pursued at this campus. So why don't I just turn it over to you completely now for a little bit, and you could tell us about this recent project you've worked on, this recent article.
Sure. Oh, sorry. You want me to start the talk, or?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Unless anybody has any questions right off the bat here, or any comments for Dr. Scott.
Okay. So
Sure.
I'm going to start. I'm going to minimize my thing so I can't really see anybody, but that's okay. All right. So today I'm speaking with you a little bit about my journey in trying to understand equity and how to bring greater equity to science and governance, especially in the marine space. All right. Okay, I'm not being able to forward here. There we go. Okay, so as I mentioned, in 2014, I left New York City, high heels, pizza and all, and I fled to Bocas del Toro, Panama, where I've been based for the last 10 years, serving as director for the School for Field Studies, SFS, Center for Tropical Island Biodiversity Studies, located in Bocas del Toro in Panama. So that blue dot on the map there, you can see that is Bocas del Toro. That's where I actually just flew from this morning to come to Panama City. So I have been there for the last 10 years, as I said. And as you can see, Panama is wedged in between Costa Rica and Colombia. And it has this sort of west to eastern orientation. And in the pink circle there, you can see the archipelago of Bocas del Toro. So not only is there an archipelago, there's the town of Bocas del Toro, but there's also the province of Bocas del Toro. There are 10 provinces that make up Panama, as well as 4 indigenous comarcas. They are semi-autonomous spaces in which indigenous peoples have rights that they can express, and they can create their own policies and regulations and rules within their own territories. And then if we zoom in even further into the archipelago of Bocas del Toro, you can see it's comprised of 9 different islands. Isla Colón is the second largest island. That's where I reside, and that's where the school is located. And Isla Bastimentos is the largest island. And as you can see here, there is a marine protected area. It says Parque Nacional Marino Isla Bastimentos. That national marine park has a very interesting shape, which maybe we'll get into further on down in the talk. But this tiny archipelago, located in the northwesternmost corner of Bocas del Toro, receives about 225,000 tourists per year. The population size on Isla Colón alone is about 10,000 people. So imagine all of these people descending into this beautiful quote-unquote paradise every single year. Who lives there? Well, it's a mixture of Afro-Panamanians, of West Indian descent, usually Jamaican or Barbadian descent. We have Chinese Panamanians, we have Panamanian, mestizos, Latinos. Everybody is there, and particularly Indigenous Panamanians. We also have immigrants from the US, Europe, and South America. The life expectancy for Panamanians, broadly speaking, throughout the whole country is about 80 years old. But for Indigenous Panamanians, that drops down to about 68 years old. And finally, one last piece of information is about 4 different languages are spoken throughout the islands. That would be Spanish, English, Wari-Wari, which is like a Jamaican patois, as well as Nabere, which is an Indigenous Nobe language. So I look at this photo and I think, ooh, it's so beautiful. I took this photo while doing actually more of a marine ecology project with students out in the field. You can see their beautiful seagrasses, bountiful mangrove islands. It's just spectacular. But something that I started thinking about maybe 5 or 6 years ago is who gets to place value on these ecosystems? Because you hear about, the blue economy, and you hear about, oh, well, this tract of mangrove is worth $26 million. And I say, okay, that's great, but who put that value on there? And how do you know its full monetary value? And how do you know other values of that ecosystem? Because it's not just monetary. And so here's another beautiful photo of the mangrove ecosystems that I have come to love. I didn't realize when I moved to Bocas 10 years ago just how much these ecosystems matter, not only to my happiness and well-being, but to the happiness and well-being of so many of us around the globe. Even for those of you in Maine, if you're joining from Maine, mangroves matter. They're vitally important for all of our survival. So again, here's this question: who gets to determine the value of an ecosystem, whether that be mangroves or the deep sea, right? Who gets to value this? And so before I get into more of the details of the work that I have been doing with mangroves, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to this paper that we recently published. I was so honored to be part of this group of amazing scientists led by Dr. Anna Spalding and Kirsten Gord-Colvert. But in thinking about who gets to value these ecosystems, we also have to consider the roots of inequities, particularly inequities in the tropics, and to try to stop that continued propulsion of inequities. And so in this paper and in coming together as scientists from all over the world, living and working in the tropics, we asked, how can ocean governance and science be made more equitable and effective? Because we know that the majority of the world's ocean-dependent people live in low to middle income countries, or MICs, in the tropics. So they are indeed the tropical majority. However, ocean governance and its agenda is mostly just based on scientific knowledge and funding and institutions from high-income countries in the global north. And so we have this imbalance with respect to funding, data sharing, the way in which it's how it's chosen for people to be able to go to these different countries to do their research. And so we're really giving a call out to the world to say, hey, we need to do a better job at centering equity in ocean governance. And what we mean by that is we really need to reconnect people in the ocean. And that's not just people living in the tropics, we have people in the tropics who, for example, live on an island where I live and don't know how to swim, for example. But I don't just mean that. What we mean is really reconnecting people around the globe to understanding just how vitally important the ocean is for their daily, day-to-day survival. We also need to redefine ocean literacy, making sure that everyone, I believe it's so important for everyone to have an education in the ocean. It's what sustains all life. And yet you don't get to some of those specialized courses on the ocean until you get to higher level undergraduate courses or into your graduate career. And I think that that should be reconsidered and put into basically from kindergarten up, right? And then we must decolonize ocean research. We have got to start dismantling systems of oppression that continue to bar people and the tropical majority from being able to have access to their own natural resources. So ocean equity, what is it? Well, it centers people and equal distribution of ocean benefits. Because right now we know that the ocean and its ecosystem services are not equally distributed throughout the globe. And ocean equity also mainstreams equity and justice in the ocean. And that includes social considerations in marine policy and practice. Because we know that, oh, did someone have a question? Sorry, I heard something. Okay. Not all groups benefit equally or have equal say. And that is particularly true for coastal dwelling peoples around the globe, and particularly marginalized groups that live in those areas. And Bocas del Toro is one of those regions. As I said, there are semi-autonomous regions within Bocas where Indigenous peoples live. However, in Bocas del Toro, we have a large Nobe population, and they tend to live in coastal regions and are ocean-dependent people. So I quickly want to just review the difference between equality and equity, because sometimes there's confusion. Equality on the top slide, at the top part of the slide, refers to, let's say we give everybody a bicycle, right? But we have someone here who is not able to use their legs. We have someone who's really a very tall person. We have someone who this bicycle seems to fit really well. And then we have a child who can't really reach the pedals. But everybody has a bike, right? So everybody should be happy because everybody has a bicycle. That's great. Equity, however, is going one step further and making sure that every single bicycle is fitted to every single person. And we can extrapolate that out to ocean equity by understanding that we need to provide equitable policies such that all communities can thrive. And so something that I always have in the back of my head that I always tell my students, I say, in conservation policy and practice, I really wish we valued human diversity as much as we value biodiversity. Seems to be the one thing that we still just can't get right. Why do we not value human diversity as much as we value biodiversity, particularly when we're talking about conservation policy and practice? So this, again, is another photo that I took out of the plane window recently, and it just shows the vastness of all of the mangrove islands that I get to play in, but I also get to see on a regular basis. It's really breathtaking. And at the moment, they're not all protected. So, well, mangroves in general are protected in Panama, but not all of these mangrove islands exist within the bounds of the marine protected area that I showed in the map earlier. But mangroves are really, really important. In fact, I would go so far as to say that they are magnificent. They protect us from many, many things. First, they mitigate wave action. So in talking about the blue economy, as sometimes people will put a monetary value on them based off of how much they don't cause houses to be sort of taken over by waves, right? So that $26 million estimate could be how many houses are on the coastline that the mangrove is protecting, for example. So they protect us from wave mitigation. They also can sequester up to 4 times as much carbon as a rainforest. They're vitally important for biodiversity. They're important for migrating bird species. They're important for coral reefs, the relationship between mangroves and coral reef ecosystems for juvenile fishes. And I mention all of this, even though many of you might know about it, again, just because these ecosystems are what drive so much of the blue economy. It's how we get fish. It's how fisheries thrive. It's just incredible. And I hope by the end of this talk, you'll appreciate mangroves as much as I do. So where are mangroves? That would be at first a good thing to know, right? So most mangroves occur in the tropics. So that would be between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. And it's interesting that less than 1% of the Earth's surface is covered by mangrove forests, but approximately 75% of those mangrove forests are only found within 15 countries in the subtropical and tropical regions. So we're really not talking about a lot of places where mangroves occur, and yet they are vitally important for the survival of all of us. And yes, in Panama, we do have a políticas policy, a national policy on wetlands, and mangroves are included in that. They are protected all throughout Panama. However, you can get permissions to be able to remove them. You have to pay a fee, and you also have to replant. So I was astonished recently, this was several years ago, and got me thinking more about policy, because it's, you know, you can go through an entire PhD and not take a single policy class. And I didn't. And it's shocking to me that I did not, that I didn't receive that. And I'm a proponent of making sure that natural science students have this understanding and have a social science background, because it really matters. We need to do a better job at uniting both the natural and social sciences. And I'm on a mission to do that. So, so I was flying over Bocas del Toro, and once again, I see this, and I thought, how in the world is it possible that some guy could come, carve out their own mangrove island, basically, and put a house and a dock around it? It's astonishing. And in Bocas del Toro, we also have a lot of unregulated tourism and development. And so you can see on the right-hand side in this photo, this is a brand new over-the-water bungalow hotel. They started with 3 units. They now have 30 units, and they have built in front of mangroves. They've disturbed a few of the mangroves, and of course, they've built on top of some coral reef. And then we also have people removing mangroves to, you know, make their ideal paradise. What is paradise for everybody? Usually it's sort of some white sand beach somewhere, right? So remove the mangroves. We don't need them. We want to make this look really pretty. So we're going to remove them and put in a fake beach, essentially. I mean, all of Miami Beach is essentially that, right? We know this from historical records all over the world. People remove mangroves, put in fill, and add sand. And so this is just a close-up of what some of these units look like over the water and near mangrove ecosystems. So I really got very upset about this. And I work closely with different entities in Panama, particularly the Tourism Authority. I recently was able to meet the new Minister of Environment and discuss with him the importance of mangrove ecosystems. But the only way as a scientist that I feel that I can really make change is by doing the research, but also sharing it as much as possible. And this work was completed with my colleague, Dr. Leon Mock, and 2 undergraduate students who really were working at a graduate level. Actually, Kate Lucas, to the right of Dr. Mock, is currently in graduate school, and Anna is now working in government with the EPA, I believe. Okay, so we decided to go out and try to figure out, is there a non-monetary benefit to mangrove ecosystems? how do people culturally value mangrove ecosystems? And let me tell you, this is a huge departure from anything I've ever done in my entire scientific career. But I'm so very grateful for working with Dr. Mock, who is a social scientist, who taught me the ways of social science. And so we really wanted to understand this and go to different communities throughout the archipelago to get a better understanding of how people think about mangroves. How do they utilize them day to day? Are they part of your day-to-day life, right? So, and we also wanted to understand that with respect to power. Power is particularly important in the tropical region where we are, because you've had systems and layers of systemic oppression to some degree. You've had the United Fruit Company was there for a very long time and set up a caste system, essentially, that relegated Indigenous peoples to the bottom rungs of society, and it did not provide them with the ability to move up the rungs of the socioeconomic caste system. And that has consequences to this day. And we were curious to know, well, what are the thoughts of Indigenous peoples in the region on the benefits of, for example, the marine protected area, or the benefits of mangrove ecosystems. So that's what we set out to do. So yes, the purpose of this study was really to center the culture, equity, and power piece that should be embedded in all scientific studies, I believe, of this sort. And we performed a cultural ecosystem services, CES, cultural ecosystem services evaluation of mangrove forests in Bocas del Toro. And we wanted to ask two very interrelated questions. First, how do communities located within the Bocas del Toro archipelago interpret the cultural importance of mangroves? Secondly, how do equity and power issues influence how different groups identify, interpret, and access cultural ecosystem services? And so when we look at cultural ecosystem services, right? So this isn't just made out of the blue. This is based off of an original framework from 2005, Millennial Ecosystem Assessment, that went out and said, hey, there are these non-monetary benefits of different ecosystems. So let's put them in a bin and we'll call them cultural. But then as other scientists started looking at this, they said, hey, wait a minute, you're not including everything here. And so the most recent and I would say robust example of cultural ecosystem services comes from Himes Cornell in 2018, where she looked at aesthetic information, right? Does it make you feel good? Is this place a place of calmness and comfort? Are there opportunities for recreation and tourism? Is there information for cognitive development? Is it important for dexterity? We also learned in the study before that children use mangroves and it helps them with their cognitive development. They're hanging from the trees. It's like a jungle gym, a natural jungle gym. And what about spiritual development? Is there a spiritual relationship that people have with these ecosystems? So what do we know? First, we know that intangible cultural ecosystem services are significant contributors to quality of life. We do know this. It's been in the literature for quite some time. And we also know that it should be included and valued in decision-making. So I started this project because I was concerned about the mangroves and their destruction, but I was also really concerned about whether or not people in positions of power who make policy are really aware of the non-monetary benefits of these systems. And maybe that would compel some of them to provide within their policies ways to also protect these ecosystems, not based on a monetary value. But we also know that if we ignore these intangible cultural ecosystem services, that perhaps researchers like myself, perhaps we're enabling techniques that further marginalize vulnerable communities and disproportionately ignore the perceptions of local communities. And so in order to get any of this information, we have to go out to the communities and ask, how do you value these ecosystems? And I hope you can see in this photo, I took the two little beady eyes of the queen conch sticking out. I think that's really fun. Okay, so we went out into the archipelago and we went and visited eight different communities. And all of these communities are mangrove dependent. They all are in mangrove areas. And just on the right-hand side, this just shows loss of mangrove habitat, new growth of mangrove habitat, and maintained areas from, I believe it was 1996 to 2012. In that time frame, we have lost about 13% of mangroves with just about 3% of new growth. And I threw this slide in here just so you have an understanding of what's meant by IL, NIL, and LSM, because I'll be referring to that in the next few slides. But IL represents Indigenous local. This is an Indigenous person, usually, and actually in this case, we only interviewed Nobe. NIL are Afro-Caribbean, Latino mestizo individuals that live in the region. And LSM, North American, European, Australian, and South American. So this is the group of people, or the groups of people that we interviewed throughout the archipelago. And so our findings ranged across different categories of cultural ecosystem services. First and foremost, and this is based off of a framework that we used from Fish and Burbes Blasquez. But importantly, we used a framework that tried to pull out some of the identifiers of identity. So do mangroves give you a sense of belonging, a sense of place, rootedness, or spirituality? With respect to experiences, do mangroves provide you with tranquility, inspiration, escape, and discovery? With capabilities, do mangroves provide you with new knowledge, health, better health, dexterity, and judgment? And then we also added this power dynamic. Because of the historical context of where we're working and living, it's really important for us to understand the intersection of class, race, and economic standards that can drive some of these inequities that we see through governance and inclusion, labor relations, and of course, historical context. So this is actually a data slide. In the social sciences, this is what we present in terms of our data and our findings. So across all groups, it's important to note that every group found a cultural benefit for mangroves. And some Indigenous locals actually suggested that the mangroves are sort of like a metaphor for their own experience and their own resilience over time. So one Indigenous local person said, "The mangrove trees are so incredibly resilient. That is why people want to use them for building and for piers. Despite all the problems with these reefs, with the reefs dying, trash everywhere, and people chopping things and building everywhere, the mangroves remain. They have always been here and remain despite difficult conditions. I think we, the Nobe, are like the mangroves that way. Despite it all, we remain and do what we must to exist, often in difficult places." And another quote to support this idea of identity from a different Indigenous woman. She stated, "It has enough benefit to help create friendships. It has been and continues to be a place for us to get together." And then we asked every single participant about how they would feel if there were no mangroves in Bocas del Toro. And many community members answered with language that really surrounded the theme of ecological grief. We heard a lot of ecological grief. And I think that's something that we are all experiencing worldwide. And it was really difficult to listen to hear local people saying that their way of life or that what they used to know is no longer. And that actually is directly affecting their sense of identity. So when we asked to imagine Bocas without mangroves, one non-Indigenous local said, "No one has asked me this before. I think first I'd be very angry because I would want to know what happened. I would feel like they stole something from me. I know it doesn't belong to me, but I feel like it is a part of me. And so I would be very angry because I grew up here and with these places." And then under experiences, which if you remember is, oh gosh, sorry, I got lost. Oh yes, tranquility, inspiration, escape, and discovery. Every stakeholder group reported mangroves as a place where they felt happy, calm, and tranquil. And that was really important because this study was completed a year after COVID. And the mental health benefits of mangroves was a really interesting revelation to us that we had never considered. So some participants cited that mangroves provided a mental escape from the stresses of life. An Indigenous local said, "One can go in here and come out there. That's part of the beauty inside the mangroves. There are small entrances and exits, and it is beautiful that you can get in here. And it's quiet. It is a part of the beauty of the community, and we need those spaces to help appreciate what we have." A non-Indigenous local said she spends time watching the mangroves because sometimes you leave depression because you get distracted by everything, both by the mangrove and the life and everything else happening in them. You get distracted for a moment. The mangroves make ferns and they make flowers. I mean, they have their own community within them, their own conservation. And this adds beauty both for ourselves and for people coming from other countries to see something different. And then with respect to our findings and capabilities, which is knowledge, health, dexterity, and judgment, many Indigenous local stakeholders discussed remembering when they were taught how to actually use mangroves for sustenance. And so this really demonstrates the connectivity between identity and capabilities. With an example here, where one Indigenous local said, "Visiting mangroves has a way of reconnecting me with the past. I remember learning how to look for fish with my brother and appreciating the presence of the other animals around while providing for my family. They, the mangroves, help me to stay in touch with my teachers, even if they have passed." And then finally, our last finding rests on this relationship between cultural ecosystem services and local equity and power dynamics. We wanted to know if people felt that they had equal access to benefits of mangroves. And many Indigenous locals and non-Indigenous locals, they felt that lifestyle migrants, so lifestyle migrants are mostly people with means, with the economic means to be able to move from a country in the global north, such as the United States, to Panama, for example, that they were able to get away with removing mangroves despite it being illegal. A non-Indigenous local reported, "Unfortunately, what counts here is the economic aspect. And if I have a lot of money and I like this beach area that has mangroves and I want to build a resort there, I pay the government and I cut everything and I make my resort. And unfortunately, although it hurts us, that is how our country is. I feel that the government, does not care if an environmental impact is caused or not. They are based more on who has money and who can pay." So in conclusion to this little study, we found that mangroves improve mental health and that they are important for certain individuals' mental health. We also found that mangroves provide a space for relationship building, for security, for a sense of belonging, and that there's a strong relationship with bocatorreños and mangrove ecosystems. We also uncovered some power inequities, that there are many misconceptions of how mangroves are used by different groups. There's a lot of blame. It's very complex. And then finally, we uncovered that there's quite a lot of ecological grief and that loss is actually experienced differently by different groups. We did find that for non-Indigenous locals and Indigenous locals, that loss is directly related to their identity, but not so much for lifestyle migrants. They considered loss more in economic terms for tourism, that it would affect their ability to provide tours. And so we need more equitable mangrove governance across the board. We need to make sure that everybody feels that they're benefiting equally and have equal say in policy and practice of mangrove governance. And we also need to really consider the cultural heritage, ancestral knowledge, and identity for future resource management planning. So what's striking about all this? Well, it's that last part. We need to consider local stakeholders' cultural heritage, ancestral knowledge, and identity when designing management plans, especially where power and equity dynamics aren't even. And my question is, why is this not standard practice? Why are we still, again, there's that thing, why do we not value human diversity as much as biodiversity? Why is this not standard practice? We should be considering cultural practices. When we design marine protected areas, we should be going out and understanding, is this something that the people that live near marine protected areas want? Is it something that they're going to benefit from equitably? These are all questions that we need to start asking. And so that's the end of that part of the talk, but I did want to say that in this quest for more equitable governance, you know, it really matters if you're someone from the global north with economic means that you're sharing and that you're creating partnerships with local entities. And to that end, with SFS and with Focus HopeSpot, we have been able to interact with a lot of the students in Changuinola, which is a region nearby, actually where Chiquita Banana is located, mostly Indigenous Nove students. And we take them out, we get them in the water, take them snorkeling. And for many of them, they only get the theory, they don't get the practice. So it's such a joy to be able to see students from the region getting into the water and getting the practice they need. And then I'm also grateful for helping to establish Focus as a hope spot through Mission Blue. And I hope, you know, in everything that we do with the Hope Spot project, which mostly has centered on educating boat captains and boat drivers, you know, we want to make sure that we're really doing it in a community-based way and that we're not imposing bigger political moves such as 30 by 30, which we can talk about after, onto populations that, first of all, don't know what that is, but secondly, don't have the means to be able to carry out some of those very large efforts. So I would like to say thank you, gracias, to the entire Bocas del Toro community. And I also want to thank some of the other students that have worked on this in the past. Support was provided by the School for Field Studies and by the Ocean Nexus Center, which is now at University of Rhode Island. So this is my contact information. If you have any questions, I'm happy to follow up with you. And I'm happy to take any questions now.
And so thank you very much, Dr. Scott, for that really informative and thoughtful look inside this world where you live. And I'm curious, while we wait for people to, well, as Nick Record or someone is cheering, clapping, and as we wait for questions to be formulated, and please, everyone, feel free to put up your hand or put a question in the chat box. Or asked to be unmuted. Here we go. Before I have questions, but we do have one that came in the chat from Nick Record, who was actually a guest on a recent Science Cafe of ours. He's from the Bigelow Institute for Ocean Sciences over in Boothbay, and he works at the nexus of marine policy around endangered North Atlantic right whales and the lobstering economy of Maine. And he has asked, are there ways that data access, data ownership, or data representation influence mangrove governance and equity in Panama? Dr. Scott, are you able to see Nick's question?
Yeah, I can see. Are there ways that data access, data ownership, or data representation influence mangrove governance and equity in Panama? Absolutely. You know, there are entities within Panama, Panamanian entities that do collect data on their own, but you know, the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, for example, has a lot of data on mangroves. How much of that is being shared? I'm not sure. Data representing influence mangrove governance and equity. Yeah, so it can be a little uneven, I would say. You know, I think that the amount of dollars and ability of the Panamanian entity to collect data is very small in comparison to an entity like the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, which is a US entity. And what happens, you know, some of that data and some of that information gets published, but it doesn't get back to the community. It doesn't get shared. So yes, it can influence mangrove governance and equity very much so. I hope
Dr.
that answers
Scott,
that sort of.
Yeah, Nick says thank you. I'm curious when you look at the kinds of values that you're bringing into the conversation around marine policy and governance. When you look at marine protected areas, such as the one that's envelops part of your stomping grounds, um, where do you see breakdowns? I know the first thing you see is a lack of consideration of the issues that you raised today. Where do you see the consequences of that in terms of Indigenous communities, communities whose voice isn't commonly heard in these discussions around conservation? Where, because you've talked about sort of a tension between ecological values and cultural values. Where do you see that going on? Because many of the values they have would seem to be aligned with
Yeah.
ecological conservation values.
Yes, except for when it comes for food insecurity. I think that's a major, major issue. In the photo that you can see here, this is on Isla Popa, which is almost adjacent to areas of the marine protected area. We're talking about communities that use canoes to go out and hook and line fish in the mangroves. And in a follow-up study to the paper that we published on the cultural aspects of mangroves, we were really looking at ecological grief and trying to understand that. But what's come out of all of this in speaking with people is that they don't feel included. There was never any inclusion of these communities in the original conversations. And that was actually published in 2005 by Carla Guerrero Montero, who actually went and looked at the process. And this is why we need social science so much. Looked at the process of how this marine protected area was established. It had no Indigenous representation whatsoever, even though this community, this Popa community, for example, is right next to the marine protected area. So one day you go to bed, you know that you can feed your family by going in your canoe to collect fish. And the next day you're told, you're not allowed to fish here. So you live a 40-minute boat ride from a grocery store. What are you going to do to provide protein to your family? And yes, we all are pro-conservation, right? But I really pause and hesitate when I see these really big initiatives being pushed by the global north into areas like Panama and the global south that don't have the resources or means to be able to effectively protect, effective protection. We have a bunch of paper parks, but it doesn't mean that they're working, right? If you don't have anybody who's able to monitor and go out and anyone who's trained to be able to do surveys on reefs to find out if we really are increasing biomass and species richness, we have no idea. And I think that's worldwide. We have absolutely no idea. We make up these things, but what are we by 2030 with the 30 by 30 movement, 30% protection by 2030? Okay, we can draw lines, right? That's fine. It makes us feel good. But are we really seeing progress? And that's a whole other question. And that's why I believe that conservation needs to be people-centered. You have to include all people. You cannot ignore sections of society because it's not convenient for you, because it's too difficult for you to include them, because they might actually hold the key to figuring out how to actually effectively enforce some of the rules and policies. If you add people to the equation, it actually could mitigate some of the problems that we're seeing.
Do you find that, and I'd still want to encourage people to raise their hands so we can unmute you and bring up, looks like David Evans is raising his actual hand.
Hi,
Yes.
Cinda. It's good to see
Hi.
you again.
It's so nice to see you.
It's been a long time. I'm still in Salt
Yeah.
Spray Cove in the summer, thank goodness.
Yay.
But thank you for the talk and thank you for all your important work. It's nice to see that the lab spawns some marine biologists as well as physician scientists.
Yes.
So thank you for doing that. My question is that the OTS, Organization for Tropical Studies, is very famous in Panama. Do you have any connection with them at all?
I personally don't. I don't know if OTS is still in because OTS was out of Duke. Was that right?
It's been out of Duke. It's been out of University of Florida, where I was for a while.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure who the host institution is now, but that's been the Tropical Studies Institute for 70 or 80 years.
Yeah, I don't really hear so much about OTS so much. We mostly interact with Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, and the School for International Training, SIT, also has a program in Panama. But those are the two entities that I have heard most about in the last 10 years that I've been in Panama.
Sounds good. Thanks
Yeah.
for doing all you're doing. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
it's
Come
so
back to
nice to meet
Salisbury
you.
Cove sometime and say hello.
I would love to. I would absolutely love to. So just so everybody knows, Dr. Evans was the first person to teach me how to properly handle sharks. He saw me struggling with the shark tank. I was like, I'm pretty sure I was going to get like marred by the barb of the dogfish shark. And he came running over and he's like, no, no, you hold it like this. And I'll never forget that. And it changed my life actually, because I didn't.
Well, that's good to know because I showed a graduate student of mine probably about the same time how to hold a shark, and I grabbed it by the front and put my little finger in its mouth by mistake,
Oh my God.
and it bit down, so it took a chunk out of my little finger.
Nice. A little memory.
So yeah, that's right. Anyway, it's great to see you.
Nice to see you, Dr. Evans.
Thank you.
You know, Dr. Scott, in an earlier conversation that you and I had once, you mentioned how when you were building your career and when you got your PhD in Miami, it was just when Barack Obama was elected president, and he was making a call for more STEM education, and particularly to overlooked communities. I'm curious, you know, and that was part of your turning towards the educational side of things. Where do you Was there anything about your experience at MDI Bio Lab or during that period that, or when you imagine people who are now there, who are young people, like, do they need to think more holistically as they study the natural world, you know, than perhaps, you know, the given curricula or the given body of knowledge provides for at this point?
Absolutely. I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, starting at a much younger age, even, I think by college, it's very late. I think this whole, you know, the holistic educational approach is really important with respect to natural social science in particular. Yeah, I always really loved people and, you know, for me, being at the bench in grad school, like pipetting my life away, I felt like, I don't know if I can do this for the rest of my life. Like, I don't know if this is for me because it was missing for me. I felt, you know, I think anyone who goes through a PhD, sometimes you feel very isolated because you're the only one who knows what is actually going on with your own project at any given time. And you might be the only person in the world who's studying that one particular thing. And it can be really lonely and isolating because, you know, your advisor kind of knows what's going on, but they don't know the depths of what you're doing every day. And so I felt a little isolated and I felt like I needed to run back to people. And that's what I did. You know, I didn't do a postdoc. I went and instead got a re-education on how to teach and how to improve STEM education for everybody. And I felt that that was really important because I didn't necessarily have so many role models, I guess, in going through the whole process. And I wanted to make sure that people coming behind me had someone who looked like them, who was teaching and who's teaching at a high level. And yeah, I think that was really important for me at the time, having gone through a really rigorous, you know, molecular evolutionary genomics, a PhD that, you know, it was fine at the time, but it really didn't represent me as a whole, I think. And so I think that what caused me to shift over into some of the more social science aspects in the social aspects surrounding science.
We do have a question in the chat that goes back to that. Devanshi Kasana, and forgive me, Devanshi, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, and please feel free to join us by audio. But she says, she says, great talk, first of all, and thanks you. And she says, in the event where value derived from the resource is also monetary or extractive, like small scale shark fisheries, how do you balance those demands while keeping equity at the center, at the heart of the conversation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, I think we have to have limits at this day and age. You know, we're kind of past the point of being able to have so many open. I mean, you look at the tuna industry. I mean, there's so many examples of fisheries that are not in balance. They're still open, but should they be, right? But that would cause economic collapse in so many different ways that we're not ready to grapple with, I think. We're not ready to change our diet. You know, people in the US, we love tuna. We love tuna sandwiches. It's like part of our diet. Can you imagine life without tuna? I don't know if that would go over really well with the US public, but getting back to the point, I think you have to have limits. I think people need to understand that there are limits to extraction. And it's something that we would have to talk to communities with. They'd have to be there from the very beginning, the development, implementation, and I mean, the whole entire thing. You've got to have people, all people present to be able to discuss it so that everybody has a stake in it. It's when people are excluded and don't have a stake in the conversation that you run into these problems. And we see that repeatedly all over the world over and over again.
It seems like we're pretty early in the dis-exclusionary process, I think, around these types of marine governance issues, from what you say. And I'm curious, you know, your study that you talked about you referred to mangrove dependence communities. My assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that was from a monetary or economic point of view, people who are getting their protein from the sea. And now the task is to expand the definition of dependence to include these cultural and other resources that you've treated on. Is that sort of where you see it going? And where do you see, what's the forum for that? Is it just more social science, more interdisciplinary work? Where does the conversation and the actual action need to go
Well,
to make change?
yeah, I think it begins with, so I was recently in Japan for my sabbatical, and I was in Yokohama and went to a conference. It was Marine Socio-Ecological, oh God, Marine Socio-Ecological Conference. And I went there and I thought, what is a socio-ecological conference? I don't even know what I'm attending, but it sounded interesting. So I went and I realized it was a lot of ecological modelers that were trying to figure out how to incorporate social fluctuations in standard models. They have absolutely no idea. So they're doing these very intricate scientific models of fisheries, for example, but then they don't know how to incorporate the needs of people into those models. And so the idea of the conference was for all of us from different sectors of science to come together to try to figure this out. And I can say we're taking baby steps, but those are the kinds of things that need to occur. Just even inviting social science and having social scientists present in a modeling meeting is a really good first step at trying to figure out how to incorporate the social side of science, you know, into these ecological models, because it's not a robust model if people and how they utilize these ecosystems are not included and incorporated. So yeah, it's very complicated, and it's a work in progress, I would say, very much so.
Well, and I think it's one that now everyone who's watched this presentation will be paying more attention to as we think about, particularly as we think about worldwide conservation issues and what and who is at stake when these policies are being made and when we advocate for them or against others. It just brings such an important piece of the puzzle to the table that I can't thank you enough, as Dr. Evans said, for its really important work. We are up at the end of the hour. I'm sure people's interest will continue. We've put a few of your links to a couple of your articles in the chat. I'll just say it out loud. Your website is Cinda Seas World. CINDA, and then seas like ocean, cindaseasworld.org, is it?
No, cindaseas.world.
Cindaseas.world. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And this will be available for people to view later. And I believe those recordings include the chat.
Yeah.
I do want to throw it open one last time. Any more questions or comments?
I
Uh,
just wanted to quickly add that if you're still interested in this topic, you know, it leans towards, I would say, environmental ocean justice. I am doing a project with two other colleagues, Dr. Anna Spalding at Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute and Felipe Baker, who is a Nobe sea turtle conservationist working with Sea Turtle Conservancy. The three of us together, we got a grant from National Geographic, and we're in the editing phase of a video that's coming out. And when I get that, I will definitely share it with Fred to provide it to you. But we go into the community. It's a video on the process of how you do social science, but it's focusing and highlighting the ideas and beliefs of Indigenous Nobe in the region on the marine protected area. And we found out some very interesting things. So
I took a look at the website that has. I think the secondary title is the wisdom of Indigenous communities.
Yes.
Is what it's about surfacing, and that seems, just as it should be.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Dr. Scott. We'll all be paying more attention to your work. Really appreciate it. And I want to thank the audience very much for showing up on a beautiful Maine evening for this event. Really appreciate it. And thanks also to Cross Insurance for their sponsorship. Now, looking ahead, as the weather turns colder and we head into 25, most of our science cafes will be held online like this one, but one exception coming up on October 22nd, which is a Tuesday. We head to Portland for a live discussion with colleagues from collaborating institutions in Maine, such as the Rue Institute. Our president, Dr. Herman Holler, will be there. As we discuss biomedical research and economic development in Maine, we'll look at the road from basic discovery to training and entrepreneurship, job creation, and of course, improved human health. So you can go to our events page at mdibal.org and get more details about that when that comes up later in October. Thank you again to everyone in the audience and Dr. Scott. Safe travels on your way from Panama back to the US. We'll look forward to checking in with you again before too long.
Nice to meet everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay. Good night, everyone.